Okay, so can a self-portrait facilitate the formulation and projection of an ideal identity? Identity is unique to the self. It is ever-changing through time and experiences, and is something that is dependent on interpretation. These aspects are compounded within photography, in particular the self-portrait. David Bates states, "If the photographic portrait is a shorthand description of a person, then portraiture is more than just a picture. It is a place of work, a semiotic event for social identity." Bates identifies the importance of the viewer in relation to the formulation of an identity, both in how the viewer interprets the individual's identity, but also how the individual alters their identity for a specific viewer. Nikki S. Lee is an artist whose work revolves around the evolving nature of identity. She states, identity is affected by other people, different relationships. Your character changes depending on whom you are with. Here Lee identifies the temporality of identity and our ability to influence it. Sherry Turkle, a professor of the social studies of science and technology, also describes identity as a fluid subject. She states, "We need time and space to fall in and out of love with people and ideas," highlighting that identity changes over time and through life experiences. If identity is a projection of the self that is ever-changing, whilst also something that is interpreted by a viewer, then an ideal identity is both a desire for an improved self and the desire for that self to be correctly interpreted by others. Between 1997 and 2001, Nikki S. Lee created a body of work titled Projects. Within this work, Lee uses masquerades to explore alternate identities. In each portrait, Lee infiltrates a group of people, creating different personas. She spends an extended period of time with each group, in some cases several months, in order to create seamlessly natural representations of each altered self. This work primarily aims to display the effect that our surroundings have on our identity, and how identity has a temporal existence, which has the capacity to change. The work was not created with the intention of facilitating Lee with an ideal identity. It has, however, allowed her time and space, as Turkle describes, within which Lee is able to fall in and out of love with people and ideas. Within the hip-hop project, Lee adopts a relaxed, laid-back approach to life. She moulds into the group and appears to rely on the male in the image, physically leaning on him. This dependent representation is contrasted in the Yuppie project, where Lee is consumed in deep thought, independently walking with intent, dressed smartly, and clutching her valued material possessions. The portrayed identities are completely different and determined by Lee's cultural identity. The process Lee goes through could focus the formulation of an ideal identity, as she has had the benefit of trialing different cultures in order to better understand her ideals. In contrast to this experimentation with different cultural identities, Jen Davies is an artist who has explored her current identity through self-portraiture. Her work interrogates the insecurities she had surrounding her weight by photographing her defining body image, displaying her loneliness and isolation over a period of 11 years. In the conclusion of this body of work, Davies underwent life-changing surgery, through which she lost 7 stone in weight. Davies speaks of her decision to alter her outward appearance by saying, "I didn't want to wake up at 40 and be in the same body." She expresses her discomfort in remaining the self she depicts in her work. Through the process of interrogating her current identity within self-portraiture, Davies has formulated an understanding of a more ideal identity. Subsequently, Davies has made changes in order to achieve this ideal. The identity here is physical. Davies recognises that the portrait is, as Bates describes, a shorthand description of a person. Her physical appearance forms a significant contribution to her representation of self. Sontag acknowledges the image's relationship to the representation of its subject. She states, "So successful has been the camera's role in beautifying the world that photographs, rather than the world, have become the standard of beautiful." Despite ideals being formulated through many influences, such as media representations and social norms, in viewing her own identity through the self-portrait, Davies was able to better understand her ideals of physical representation and convey these altered ideals to the audience. It's important to mention that Davies continued to create the self-portraits throughout this process, as a documentation of what changed. The newest image is, as Sontag suggests, the recognition of Davies' identity to others, rather than it just being a change within itself. An ideal identity may not be achievable in reality, as an ideal is something that resides in the imagination, a desired conception of what is most perfect or suitable. It may be possible instead, however, to project an idealised identity to the viewer by influencing their interpretation of an image. Self-portraiture can help to facilitate such a projection. Mike Melia recognises this projection of a selected identity in his project Self-Absorbed. Melia represents himself as a brand of products. These products are left in public spaces for others to find, as a replacement of the constant updates we provide on social media. This work aims to suggest that we are able to create a brand of self to sell to others. Melia describes how he created the work in response to the trend of posting self-portraits online. He states, addiction to broadcasting the self addiction to broadcasting self-portraits on social media is the new heroin of the millennial generation. This demonstrates a somewhat elitist viewpoint towards the so-called addiction. However, it is clear that social media has provided a platform that offers a space for a formulated ideal self to be projected to others. In her book, Untangling the Web, Alex Krotowski speaks of projecting an ideal self, saying, "We redefine ourselves into something that eventually we become content with." Here, Krotowski refers to the use of the web and how users of social media are able to project an ideal identity. Projection of an ideal identity is not exclusive to the web. In fact, even as far back as the 1500s, pre-photography, Queen Elizabeth I realised the importance of the portrait in representing the self. She had strict control over her portraits, only allowing certain artists to paint her, and any portraits that did not meet her satisfaction would be destroyed. Her hands make prominent appearance in the majority of her state portraits, as she considered them to be her best feature. The projection of a preferred identity does not end here. Symbolism was used to project specific messages to her audience. The pelican portrait displays two main messages. The first are the two flowers above her shoulders, the rose on the left and the fleur-de-lis on the right, representing her heritage to both England and France. The other main symbol is the pelican brooch pinned to her bodice, who, legend has it, would sacrifice itself by plucking its own breast to feed its dying young. It was used to represent her selfless love for her subjects. Another example of this symbolism is within the phoenix portrait. The phoenix, a mythical bird who never dies but is instead reborn, is a symbol of the Queen's longevity. It is said that only one phoenix would live at any one time, so this also symbolises the Queen's uniqueness and sacrifice. The rainbow portrait was painted when the Queen was in her late 60s, yet a beautiful, young, ageless woman is portrayed. The jewelled serpent on her sleeve represents wisdom. The ruby heart it holds in its mouth symbolises that of the Queen. Her cloak is decorated with eyes and ears, implying that she hears and sees all. The crown is an obvious symbol of stature and royalty. The pearls, a celebration of her virginity and purity, and the rainbow she holds in her right hand, a promise of peace and prosperity. The symbolism held within these portraits projects specific ideal messages to the audience, not dissimilar to ideals projected within self-portraiture today. Susan Sontag references the importance of social imagery. She stated, "Photography is not practiced by most people as an art. It is mainly a social right, a defence against anxiety, and a tool of power." The power that Sontag refers to is even more prominent in that of the self-portrait, as the power given to the photographer is that of the subject. This power is given to many in the digital age, with the accessibility to represent oneself. Richard refers to this power when he suggests that rather than quoting that "we are all photographers now," it would be more appropriate to quote "we are all editors now." The projection of an ideal self is dependent on the selection of an ideal with relation to the prospective viewer. As Bates stated, portraiture is more than just a picture. It is a place of work, a semiotic event for social identity. It is important not to undermine the power of the reader in the self-portrait. Not only the obvious that each reader will interpret the self-portrait differently depending on their own identity and past experiences, but also how the viewer's potential interpretation of the image can direct both the formulation and projection of the self-portrait. A self-portrait created for a professional environment which may project a serious intellectual representation of the self would differ from that of a self-portrait of the same individual created for a social environment, which may project a fun-loving, amusing and somewhat carefree representation of the same self. These identities differ depending on the idealised projection for each specific audience. It is clear that it is possible for multiple ideals to be displayed to multiple audiences through a self-portrait. The consideration of the audience in the formulation of the self-portrait directs the outcome. It has been established that identity is a fluid concept that evolves over time. It can be formulated through the desire for a future ideal self and the desire for the ideal self to be recognised. As seen with the work of Nicky S. Lee and Jen Davies, self-portraiture can be used as a tool to focus the formulation of an ideal identity. Mike Mellier displayed it is possible for ideal identities to be projected through self-portraiture and other platforms such as social media, as did the portraits of Queen Elizabeth I. However, throughout these examples, awareness is key. If an ideal is, as discussed, a desire for an improved self, it is only possible for that ideal to be formulated if the photographer is aware of their current identity. It is only possible for an ideal identity to be projected if the photographer is aware that the self-portrait is a shorthand description representation of the self. For the photographer who was aware of these measures, the self-portrait provides a platform for this ideal to be founded and displayed. It may then be argued that for the photographer who is completely comfortable with their identity and has no desire to formulate or project an ideal, the self-portrait is of no use.
Does anyone have any questions for Caterpillar?
Do you have any thoughts about digital media and how that's kind of changing people's identity and affecting how people present themselves online?
So, as I said, with the accessibility for everyone to present themselves online, it definitely means that it's not exclusive to photographers and artists anymore. I think that the fact that it doesn't happen in real time is really important. The fact that we can edit things. So, for example, the conversation that I'm having with you now would be different if I was to think about it and then email you later, because I would have had time to edit what I was going to say and really project the type, the something that I want to project to you.
Anyone else? What made you focus so much on the Queen Victoria portraits?
Well, it's just the symbolism really that she uses, and I think that is relevant to today. And even a symbol of a simple smile. So when the camera is pointed at you, directed at you, my initial reaction is to smile. And it got me thinking of why that is and what is it that I'm trying to say through that. So yeah, just the thought of how we represent ourselves projects specific messages to the viewer.
Looking into the representation of the self, do you think that this is going to affect how you photograph different subjects in the future?
Definitely. I think that it's more of a responsibility than I perhaps thought before. And yeah, I'm so much more aware now of what I actually can say through an image and perhaps what I should be saying and what I shouldn't be saying.
I think it's interesting that you use the portrait of Queen Elizabeth. But do you think there's a difference between the artistic representation of the self and the photographic representation of the self?
To some extent, yes, because the photograph is more of a true representation of the self in terms of that the artist can paint whatever they want in reality. However, in this case with Queen Elizabeth, she had strict control over who painted her, and the fact that she would destroy any image of herself that she didn't want to be out there. So in that case, it is really controlled as well. And I know that it's more important for her in some respects, because that image, that portrait of her, would be the only thing that the majority of people would see of her at that time.
Any other questions?
Do you think after just studying this, it's changed the way you represent yourself online? Has that changed now?
Yeah, definitely. I'm so much more aware of what I'm posting online, and even just in the last few months in the lead up to it, I've really thought about what I'm saying and what I'm posting and why I'm doing it, and is that just to get sort of gratification from other people?
So you're editing more, maybe?
Possibly, yeah, definitely. And I think the more you are aware of it, you can't help but edit it in that respect.
Any other questions at all? No? Let's go.